physical copy, that's what I need you to be following. And I'll also send out an email. Outside, the sky is blue. The person that are facial expressions communication process test. Some of you would probably know. Hello there, welcome to my favorite lesson that we're going to be talking about, cave paintings. When you think of a cave, this is probably what you imagine. A giant opening, you walk in, and there's a massive room. However, when we're talking about cave paintings, this is not necessarily what we're going to find. And even whenever you're looking at the modern context, when you can walk in with a flashlight, that's also not exactly what we're looking at. If you look at these pictures, you'll see that oftentimes these people will have to make their way through very, very small spaces. I don't know about you, but I'm severely claustrophobic, and even the thought of doing this for 10 or 15 feet sends shivers down my spine. As you'll see in the videos later on, it actually takes sometimes upwards of 2 miles of this type of travel, where they're going face to face with a rock wall, when they're crawling through water, when they're crawling through mud. And this is what people had to do in the ancient world in order to get to some of these places where their drawings still exist. And what did those drawings consist of? It consisted of their daily life. It consisted of the animals that inspired awe. It consisted of the animals that they hunted. But most importantly, it was a way for them to say, I am here. It was a form of communication that allowed them to express after their own death. Up until this point, there was no way to do that. And that's the crucial step into a different type of communication.
You now walk the same path as these early artists. And in this surreal, otherworldly place, it's almost possible to imagine that you hear the muffled footfall of skin boots on soft earth, or that you see the flickering of a torch around the next bend. When I'm in a cave, I often find myself wondering, what drove these people to go so deep, to brave dangerous and narrow passageways to leave their mark? In this video clip that was shot 1/2 kilometer, or about 1/3 of a mile underground, in the cave of Cudon in Spain, we found a series of red paintings on a ceiling in a previously unexplored section of the cave. As we crawled forward military style, with the ceiling getting ever lower, we finally got to a point where the ceiling was so low that my husband and project photographer Dylan could no longer achieve focus on the ceiling with his DSLR camera. So while he filmed me, I kept following the trail of red paint with a single light and a point-and-shoot camera that we kept for that type of occasion. 1/2 kilometer underground. Seriously, what was somebody doing down there with a torch or a stone lamp? I mean, me, it makes sense, right? But you know, this is the kind of question that I'm trying to answer with my research. I study some of the oldest art in the world. It was created by these early artists in Europe between 10,000 and 40,000 years ago. And the thing is that I'm not just studying it because it's beautiful, although some of it certainly is. But what I'm interested in is the development of the modern mind, of the evolution of creativity, of imagination, of abstract thought, about what it means to be human. While all species communicate in one way or another, only we humans have really taken it to another level. Our desire and ability to share and collaborate has been a huge part of our success story. Our modern world is based on a global network of information exchange, made possible in large part by our ability to communicate, in particular using graphic or written forms of communication. The thing is, though, that we've been building on the mental achievements of those who came before us for so long that it's easy to forget that certain abilities haven't already existed. It's one of the things I find most fascinating about studying our deep history. Those people didn't have the shoulders of any giants to stand on. They were the original shoulders. And while a surprising number of important inventions come out of that distant time, what I want to talk to you about today is the invention of graphic communication. There are 3 main types of communication: spoken, gestural, so things like sign language, and graphic communication. Spoken and gestural are by their very nature ephemeral. It requires close contact for a message to be sent and received, and after the moment of transmission, it's gone forever. Graphic communication, on the other hand, decouples that relationship. And with its invention, it became possible for the first time for a message to be transmitted and preserved beyond a single moment and place in time. Europe is one of the first places that we start to see graphic marks regularly appearing in caves, rock shelters, and even a few surviving open-air sites. But this is not the Europe we know today. This was a world dominated by towering ice sheets 3 to 4 kilometers high, with sweeping grass plains and frozen tundra. This was the Ice Age. Over the last century, more than 350 Ice Age rock art sites have been found across the continent, decorated with animals, abstract shapes, and even the occasional human.
We've come to Asturias to sample small calcite deposits on top of cave art.
Right.
And we can date when these formed so we can get an age for when the paintings were done.
That's as close as I can get with my hand, so without touching anything.
Already in Spain, we have dated art that is 15,000 years older than previously thought, but it's also the oldest art that we have in Europe, dating to at least 41,000. And what's interesting about that date is that we can't tell at the moment whether in fact it means it was painted by Neanderthals or whether it was painted by the earliest modern humans to arrive in Europe. Modern humans evolved around 200,000 years ago in Africa, but we don't find them using things that express their symbolic thoughts until maybe 100,000 years ago. So the earliest paintings that we have are actually found here in Europe. And there's a really interesting question as to why it was in Europe that painting started rather than in Africa when modern humans have been around for a very long time. And there are several reasons why this might be. One is that Europe was populated by Neanderthals at the point at which modern humans arrived, and they may have had to reorganize themselves into different social structures in order to survive, in order to compete for resources and food. And therefore they would need means of maintaining social cohesion, and that could be through new religious practices that required the painting of caves, for example. We're also interested in whether or not human symbolic behavior coincides, for example, with language, or whether human symbolic behavior in fact dates right back to the point at which we start looking like humans, in which our skeletons look like they do today. And then we're also interested in whether or not Neanderthals themselves could be producing art, and the dating of this will tell us whether or not they are made by modern humans or made by Neanderthals. It is big news, but it's big news, I think, because people have dismissed Neanderthals as symbolic individuals. But in fact, elsewhere in Spain, we find evidence for Neanderthal use of pigment, perhaps as body adornment, makeup if you like. So it wouldn't be too surprising to find out that they also painted caves.
One of the really important things you need to remember is that language is only the use of symbols to denote something else that might not even be there. And so as we look at cave drawings, you have to realize the astounding jump that took place in order for the symbols that were once spoken word to jump onto a medium other than spoken language. In this case, it was drawing on a rock wall. And that jump took a massive change in the way that humans were thinking and the way that they were expressing themselves. And I really need you to remember that signs are the foundation of all communication. And so choosing the right sign, choosing the right symbol to communicate what you want the audience to receive is of the utmost importance.
This incredible art that mostly dates between 10 and 40,000 years ago, what we often think of course, is the animals. But there's this other enormous group called the geometric signs that outnumber the animals and the humans at most sites by a ratio of 2 to 1 or more. So June 2014, myself and my husband and project photographer Dylan, we were in northern Spain. We were at a site called Collevera Cave, and we were so excited to finally be there. Collevera, the entrance is 30 meters up. It's 100 feet. It's a cathedral entrance in a wooded hillside in the foothills of the Pyrenees. There's like a whole wreath of dangling green vines coming down. It's inviting. It wants you to come in. And so I can understand why people might have decided to go in there 14,000 years ago. What's a little more difficult to understand is why they decided to go so far in. Because the very first art, there's something about caves. A shadowy opening in a limestone cliff that draws you in. As you pass through the portal between light and dark, you enter a subterranean world, a place of perpetual gloom, of earthy smells, of hushed silence. Long ago in Europe, ancient people also entered these underground worlds. As witness to their passage, they left behind mysterious engravings and paintings, like this panel of humans, triangles, and zigzags from Ojo Guarenya in Spain. Is 780 meters, half a mile into the cave. You can probably just see some faint pigment markings on the wall that is not modern graffiti. These are not animals, but they're not writing either. These are the geometric signs. They came half a mile into the cave to make these. If we enhance it, you can see a little bit more. This is a very cool color enhancement program created by American rock art researcher John Harmon. And suddenly you can see more, but still no animals. Nothing as far as the eye can see. This is very unusual. Animals are normally found everywhere. But don't worry, we just got to keep going a little farther. So we keep going, 3/4 of a mile in, and there's another little passageway here with 2 horses. So the animals are represented, they're just in a completely different section of the cave. And as you can see, they're very simple, but we also have all this detail that kind of lets you know that there's something going on. There's a hint here that there's some artistic ability that's underlying what they're doing here. So we got 2 horses, that's it. You keep going a little farther, and now there's a little crevice off to the right this time. And somebody went up there to make these little dots. Let me enhance it for you. But these little dots, somebody took their finger and dipped it in paint and made those marks. And as so often happens when I find myself in these places, I'm like, what were you doing here? Why did you come 3/4 of a mile or 1.2 kilometers in a cave to make dots? So let me introduce you to some of this Paleolithic or Stone Age art that mostly dates between 10 and 40,000 years ago. What we often think of course, is the animals. The animals are by far the majority of what we call figurative or representational art. And a lot of it is hunting animals. So we've already seen a horse, here's a deer. We have a fabulous purple bison. It's the only one of its kind because most of the art, when it's painted, is either red or black. And so this fabulous purple bison, I just love him. He's like this unique little guy hanging out in northern Spain. So we've got him. And then also, we do have a few other figurative images of humans. And this is engraving. This is the other way that they made the art. But there's this other enormous group called the geometric signs that outnumber the animals and the humans at most sites by a ratio of 2 to 1 or more. They can be simple things like this circle. They can be more complex things like this incredibly complicated sign that was located in this panel in Spain, which is a one-off. It's the only one of its kind in the world. They can be dots, they can be lines, they can be triangles. So they're the full range, everything that's abstract, and that's kind of how they've been defined over the years, abstract characters that don't represent anything from the mundane world. So let me tell you some of my fun results. There are only 32 signs across an entire continent and a 30,000-year time period. My friends, these are not random doodles or decorations. So what I noticed was that there's actually each one of them has its own distinct patterning too. These are not all doing the same things. They're doing different things in different places. So there were patterns across space and time. And that's what's so intriguing and exciting. So let me show you a couple of those patterns. This is a child's hand. This is 27,000-year-old child's hand. Now, hands are a fascinating one because they're at their most popular at the very earliest time period. So between 25 and 40,000 is when we find hands. After that, they start to fade out of popularity until they vanish towards the end of the Ice Age. They just go away. People stop making them. So that's one pattern. Another pattern that's very interesting is this is called a tectiform. So this is like a roof-shaped. And these are only made in the Dordogne region of France between 13,000 and 17,000 years ago. That's where they're all located, except for one site, 250 miles to the south across the Pyrenees Mountains in Spain. And it is exactly the same. I've talked to the researcher at that site. We've looked at pictures, even down to the little dots that you can see, the technique that was used. It's the exact same thing. How did it get there? This is what's so fun about the signs, is that we can actually follow people and ideas at these incredible time depths and get a sense of how their culture was developing, how were they learning about symbolism, what was going on. So we've got these signs that were being used very purposefully by people who obviously know what they meant. The obvious question people always want to know is it writing? Now, if these were random doodles or decorations, we would expect to see a lot more variation. But instead, what we find are the same signs repeating across both space and time. Some signs start out strong before losing popularity and vanishing, while other signs are later inventions. But 65% of those signs stayed in use during that entire time period. Things like lines, rectangles, triangles, ovals, and circles, like we see here from the end of the Ice Age at a 10,000-year-old site high in the Pyrenees Mountains. And while certain signs span thousands of kilometers, other signs had much more restricted distribution patterns, with some being limited to a single territory, like we see here with these divided rectangles that are only found in northern Spain, and which some researchers have speculated could be some sort of family or clan signs. On a side note, there is a surprising degree of similarity in the earliest rock art found all the way from France and Spain to Indonesia and Australia. With many of the same signs appearing in such far-flung places, especially in that 30,000 to 40,000 year range, it's starting to seem increasingly likely that this invention actually traces back to a common point of origin in Africa. But that, I'm afraid, is a subject for a future talk. So back to the matter at hand. There can be no doubt that these signs were meaningful to their creators. I'm not talking about writing yet. There's just not enough characters at this point to have represented all of the words in the spoken language, something which is a requirement for a full writing system. Nor do we see the signs repeating regularly enough to suggest that they were some sort of alphabet. Graphic communication in the world, Sumerian cuneiform, Egyptian hieroglyphs, the earliest Chinese script, all emerged between 4,000 and 5,000 years ago, with each coming into existence from an earlier proto-system made up of counting marks and pictographic representations, where the meaning and the image were the same. So, a picture of a bird would really have represented that animal. It's only later that we start to see these pictographs become more stylized until they almost become unrecognizable, and that we also start to see more symbols being invented to represent all those other missing words in the language, things like pronouns, adverbs, adjectives. So knowing all this, it seems highly unlikely that the geometric signs from Ice Age Europe were truly abstract written characters. Instead, what's much more likely is that these early artists were also making counting marks, maybe like this row of lines from Riparo di Zalmennica in Sicily, as well as creating stylized representations of things from the world around them. Could some of the signs be weaponry or housing? Or what about celestial objects, like star constellations? Or maybe even rivers, mountains, trees, landscape features. Possibly like this black penniform, surrounded by strange bell-shaped signs from the site of El Castillo in Spain. The term penniform means feather-shaped in Latin, but could this actually be a depiction of a plant or a tree? Some researchers have begun to ask these questions about certain signs at specific sites, but I believe the time has come to revisit this category as a whole. The irony in all this, of course, is that having just carefully classified all of the signs into a single category, I have a feeling that my next step will involve breaking it back apart as different types of imagery are identified and separated off. Now, don't get me wrong, the later creation of fully developed writing was an impressive feat in its own right. But it's important to remember that those early writing systems didn't come out of a vacuum, and that even 5,000 years ago, people were already building on something much older, with its origins stretching back tens of thousands of years to the geometric signs of Ice Age Europe and far beyond, to that point deep in our collective history when someone first came up with the idea of making a graphic mark and forever changed the nature of how we communicate. Thank you.
So, as we finish up the video, I think that it's important that we talk about a couple of things. Number one, how incredibly difficult it would have been for these people to create these cave art drawings. it was not just a doodle. It had to have been something that was more significant in their life. And I think that it's beautiful that these people wanted to leave their mark. And it's amazing how communication is evolving as we go through the history. How it started as guttural grunts, maybe some nonverbals, slowly developed into language. And then that language became more and more symbolic and eventually turned into graphic communication that we see in cave art drawings. One thing that you noticed in that last video is that the transformation from spoken language to cave art also was the precursor to written language. And so we wouldn't have been able to have written language if we hadn't made that jump from speaking words to drawing words. And I thought it was really cool how they showed you how some words started as a drawing of the word, and then in order to save space, they flipped it, and then eventually it became more and more stylized to where it didn't even represent a picture. Instead, it was just a symbol that stood for that word. And as we talk about cuneiform, hieroglyphics, things like that, it's going to get more and more, it's going to become a lot easier for you to see how that change occurred. But I think that it's important that you realize that communication did not just occur overnight, and that all the different types of communication that we do are very, very important, and that we have to make specific choices when we communicate. Really, that's the entire point that I want to make as we cover the history of communication, is that you are making a choice in what to send as a message, and that choice matters a great deal. All right, in regards to the assignment itself, you are going to have to make a cave art drawing for every single year that you existed. And so that means that you are going, if you're 15 years old, you're going to have 15 pages of cave art that represent your life. And I will show you some examples tomorrow in class. But this is not going to be just if you are someone who's artistic, because as you saw in the videos today, that a lot of those were just stick drawings. They were just very basic drawings of even the animals that they came across. And so this does not have to be something where you're afraid of it if you don't have that particular gift of being able to draw or being able to paint or anything like that. That being said, the more intricate your design, the more intricate your painting and your cave art, you're going to get bonus points for that. So some of you already need those bonus points. I would suggest maybe trying your hardest in this assignment so that you can get those bonus points. And that's it. All right, thank you. Have a great day.